In an upscale restaurant in the heart of Raleigh, North Carolina, a moment of mockery would soon turn into something unforgettable. The hum of conversations filled the air at the Ivy Room, a high-end dining spot known for its elegant ambience. A delicate piano melody played softly in the corner as the staff hurried between tables, balancing plates and drink orders. Among them was Chloe, a 25-year-old waitress with a quiet demeanor but a fierce passion for music. Most people saw Chloe as just another face in the crowd, an employee in uniform. But deep inside, she carried dreams much bigger than the glamorous world around her. Music was her true passion, something she had cherished since childhood. Ever since she was a child, the piano had been her escape. She had learned to play by ear, mimicking the songs she heard on the radio, and soon moved on to more complex pieces. Despite her growing talent, music was a luxury she couldn't afford to pursue. To make ends meet, Chloe worked at the Ivy Room, a stepping stone towards the music academy she dreamt of attending one day. Most of the staff knew about her secret love for music, having caught her practicing on the old piano during breaks. That evening, as the rush of customers started to settle down, a new guest arrived. And with him, a challenge Chloe didn't see coming. The doors of the restaurant swung open, and in walked Daniel Pierce, a wealthy businessman whose presence commanded attention. Tall, impeccably dressed, and with an air of superiority, Daniel was known for his sharp wit and ruthless personality. His entrance was grand, the kind that made everyone in the room take notice. Chloe's co-workers exchanged wary glances. They knew Daniel well. He wasn't just any customer, he was a man who enjoyed making others uncomfortable. Chloe, however, remained unfazed. She had dealt with difficult customers before, and Daniel would be no different, or so she thought. As he scanned the room, Daniel's eyes fell on Chloe. He paused, seemingly intrigued by her. A slight smirk appeared on his face. Chloe, unaware of his gaze, focused on her work, but she would soon become the center of his attention. Chloe, who had grown up in a small town in South Carolina, knew well what it was like to have dreams that seemed impossible. Her mother, a single parent, worked tirelessly to provide for Chloe and her siblings. Music had always been a comfort, but it was never more than a dream. The old piano, gifted by a neighbor, was her first real connection to music. While other children played outside, Chloe spent hours teaching herself how to play. Over the years, she played at church and school recitals, but recognition was always elusive. When she turned 18, the reality of her situation hit hard. No scholarships and no way to pursue a career in music. Chloe had to put her dreams on hold and focus on earning a living. The piano was packed away, but it was never truly gone. She moved to Raleigh looking for work and found herself at the Ivy Room, not just for the paycheck, but because of the grand piano in the corner. Though she didn't have time to play often, just knowing it was there gave her comfort. As the night wore on, Daniel began to entertain himself at his table. His voice echoed loudly, recounting tales of his business triumphs and belittling those who had less ambition. His companions laughed along with him, but it was clear they were more afraid of him than truly enjoying his company. Chloe, as always, kept her head down and continued with her work, though she couldn't help but feel the tension in the air. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but something about Daniel felt different. His presence seemed to demand attention, and she could sense that he was watching her every move. Eventually, Daniel spoke up again, his tone loud and cutting. "So, Chloe," he began, his eyes glinting with amusement, "what is it you do when you're not busy serving tables? Surely a woman like you has bigger dreams than this." Chloe paused for a moment, feeling the weight of his gaze. "I play piano sometimes," she replied softly, hoping to deflect the conversation. Daniel smirked. "A pianist, huh?" He chuckled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Why don't you play something for us then? There's a piano right there. Surely someone with your talent would be happy to entertain us." Chloe felt the pressure mounting. She glanced at the piano in the corner, then back at Daniel, who was now looking at her with a smirk on his face. The room had gone quiet, and everyone was waiting for her response. She wanted to refuse, to walk away and ignore his taunts, but something inside her shifted. She had been silenced for too long. She wasn't about to let this man, this stranger, define her worth. "Fine," Chloe said, her voice steady but low. "I'll play." The room held its breath. With a deep breath, Chloe stood up and walked toward the piano. The eyes of every diner in the room followed her as she moved. She could feel their gazes burning into her back, the pressure mounting with every step. The grand piano gleamed under the soft lighting, the keys inviting her to play. Chloe sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she positioned herself on the bench. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She took another deep breath, and as her fingers brushed over the keys, the first few notes were soft and hesitant, like a quiet challenge. But then something shifted. Her confidence began to build, and the music flowed from her as naturally as breathing. Chloe chose a soulful piece she had mastered years ago, Clair de Lune by Debussy. The delicate melody filled the room, weaving its way through the silence. It was as if the music itself was defying the mockery, speaking louder than any words ever could. As Chloe's fingers danced over the piano keys, the room fell into complete silence. The once loud chatter of the other diners faded away, replaced by the delicate strains of the music. Even Daniel, who had been the loudest and most arrogant person in the room, was now still, his attention fully captured by her playing. The piece Chloe had chosen was one of her favorites, and with every note she poured her heart into it. It was as though the piano was an extension of her soul, each chord a reflection of everything she had endured, every sacrifice she had made. The audience was spellbound. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if time itself had stopped. Chloe's music spoke volumes, louder than any words she could have said to defend herself. And as the final chord reverberated through the room, the silence that followed was thick and profound. The first to break the silence was one of the other diners, an older woman sitting near the piano. She stood up slowly and clapped, the sound of her applause the first to echo in the room. One by one, others joined in. The applause grew louder, more passionate, until the entire restaurant was applauding. Chloe remained seated at the piano, her hands frozen on the keys. She was overwhelmed by the warmth of the applause, but she couldn't bring herself to look up right away. It took her a few moments to gather her bearings before she finally lifted her gaze. When her eyes met the diners, she saw something she hadn't expected: admiration, respect. There was no longer mockery in the air, no longer the condescension that had weighed on her shoulders throughout the evening. She had shifted the energy in the room. Even Daniel, who had been the instigator of this whole spectacle, seemed to be taken aback. He clapped, but his applause was slow and hesitant, a far cry from the boisterous, arrogant clapping he had given earlier. Chloe stood up from the piano bench, her legs trembling, but her heart filled with something she hadn't felt in a long time: empowerment. The applause continued for a moment longer before it began to fade, but the change in the room was undeniable. She didn't look at Daniel right away. She didn't need to. The room had already spoken. But when her gaze finally met his, she saw the shift in him too. The smug smirk he had worn earlier was gone. In its place was an expression of surprise, maybe even discomfort. "Well, that was unexpected," Daniel finally said, breaking the silence, though his words felt hollow. "I suppose talent really does come from the most unexpected places." His companions shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to laugh or remain silent. Chloe didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gave him a small, deliberate nod, her gaze unwavering. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, "but I'm not here to prove anything to you. I just wanted to play." The subtle sting of her words lingered in the air, and Daniel's smug expression faltered. He cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to regain his composure. As the room began to settle, Chloe returned to her station. Her steps were more confident now, her back straighter, and her mind clearer than it had been all evening. She had not only proven herself through her music, but she had reclaimed her sense of self. The rest of the evening passed by in a blur, but Chloe could feel a shift in how people were looking at her. The diners who had once ignored her now greeted her with warmth, their eyes filled with admiration. When she passed by Daniel's table, his group was noticeably quieter. His companions, who had laughed at her expense just hours before, now avoided her gaze. The room had shifted, and with it, their perceptions of her. Chloe didn't feel the need to gloat. The applause was enough. The respect was enough. She had stood her ground, not just as a waitress, but as a person worthy of recognition. As she cleared the last of the plates and the restaurant began to empty out, Chloe overheard a conversation from one of the patrons who had been there earlier. "You know, I thought she was just another waitress," the man said to his companion. "But that performance, she's got real talent." Chloe smiled to herself, feeling a sense of pride not in the words of others, but in the quiet confirmation that her dreams were not as out of reach as she had once thought. As she finished cleaning up and started to collect her things, one of the other waitresses approached her with a smile. "That was amazing, Chloe. I've never heard anything like it." Chloe smiled modestly. "Thank you. It feels good to be heard." The evening ended on a quiet note, and as Chloe made her way out of the restaurant, she couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. This was only the beginning. She didn't know where this newfound confidence would take her, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path. Her dreams weren't out of reach. They were waiting for her, just around the corner. The next day, Chloe received a call from a local music producer who had been in the restaurant the night before. "I'm not promising fame or fortune," he said, "but I'd love to hear more of your music. How about recording a demo?" Chloe could hardly believe it. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. It wasn't a guaranteed ticket to success, but it was a chance, a step towards something real. She agreed, and as she hung up the phone, she felt her heart racing. For the first time in years, she could see the possibility of a future where her music wasn't just a dream, it was her reality. Chloe spent the next few days preparing for the demo recording. It wasn't much, but it was a step forward. Her mind raced with possibilities. This was her chance to show the world what she was made of. She practiced tirelessly on her old piano, the keys familiar but worn, just like her. She could still feel the vibrations from the time she spent as a child playing, dreaming, and hoping. The day of the recording, Chloe walked into the small, modest studio with her head held high. It wasn't the grandiose place she had always imagined, but it felt like home. The walls were lined with old equipment, and the scent of coffee hung in the air. The producer, a middle-aged man with an easy smile and a quick laugh, welcomed her warmly. "I'm glad you came," he said, setting up his equipment. "Let's see what you've got." Chloe sat at the piano, taking a deep breath. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, but now, under the spotlight of the studio, it felt different. This was real. She began playing, letting the music flow through her. The notes poured out effortlessly, like a river of emotion that had been dammed up for too long. It was raw, it was real, and it was all hers. The producer sat back, nodding slowly as he listened. Chloe felt a flicker of doubt creep up, but she pushed it away, focusing on the music. She wasn't doing this for anyone else. She was doing it for herself. When the song ended, the studio fell silent. Chloe's hands hovered above the keys for a moment, her heart still racing from the emotional release. Finally, the producer spoke. "That was beautiful, Chloe. You've got something really special." Chloe exhaled, a smile creeping onto her face. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And sometimes that was all that mattered. A few weeks later, Chloe received a call that would change everything. The demo had caught the attention of a record label. They wanted to sign her. She could hardly believe it. The dream she had been chasing for so long was finally within reach. But Chloe knew this was just the beginning. As she signed the contract, her heart swelled with pride. This wasn't just about music. It was about everything she had overcome, every moment of doubt, every time she had almost given up. Chloe had made it. She had stayed true to herself, to her music, and now the world was ready to hear her. As she looked back on the journey, starting from the quiet, humble waitress at the restaurant, she realized that the only way to truly succeed was to believe in herself and never let anyone define her worth. Chloe's life changed in ways she had only dreamed of. Her music began to reach more people, and the record label supported her every step of the way. She was no longer the quiet waitress with a piano dream. The first time she walked onto a stage, the nerves were still there, but now she embraced them. They weren't signs of weakness. They were signs that she cared, that the music meant something to her. Her performances became a blend of vulnerability and power. She wasn't just singing the songs, she was living them. Every note was a part of her journey, every lyric a reflection of the struggles and triumphs she had faced. Chloe had to learn quickly that fame came with its own set of challenges. Not everyone would be supportive. and not everyone would understand her art. But she had learned the most important lesson of all: never let anyone else define her. There were moments when the pressure was overwhelming. The long hours in the studio, the constant scrutiny, and the expectations were enough to make anyone second-guess their path. But Chloe had learned how to stay grounded. She found strength in her music. The piano had always been her refuge, and it was her refuge now more than ever. Whenever the weight of the world felt too heavy, she would sit at the piano and let the music soothe her soul. One evening, after a particularly exhausting rehearsal, Chloe sat down at the piano in her hotel room, playing a melody she had never written before. It was hauntingly beautiful. She recorded the melody on her phone, thinking it could be something. It wasn't perfect, but it had potential. The next day, she brought it to her producer. After listening to the recording, the producer smiled. "You've got something here, Chloe. This is special." That melody became one of her breakout songs. It was raw, it was real, and it connected with people in a way that nothing else had before. Chloe's music reached new heights. She began to headline tours, and the audiences grew larger with each performance. Her story, her resilience, her passion had become an inspiration to thousands. She still remembered that night at the restaurant, the cruel challenge from Leonard, and the way her music had silenced him. She had come so far from that moment, but it had shaped her. Chloe now understood that the greatest gift she had was her ability to stay true to herself, to her art, and to the music that had always been there for her. As she stood on stage looking out at the crowd, Chloe knew one thing for certain: she had found her place in the world, and nothing, not even Leonard or anyone else, could ever take that away from her.